Welcome back. I'm your host, Dr. Stephanie Holmes, and today we're sponsored by Autism Spectrum Resources for Marriage and Family. And today we have an interesting topic, kind of a niche within a niche, autism in ministry and the mission field. And I have somebody with me today that I think knows a little bit about that, Jenilee Goodwin. Thank you for being on the show today, Jenilee.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, let me tell y'all a little bit about her. She's a certified professional life coach. She's a certified autism coach. She's an ordained minister. She has over 20 years of career ministry experience. She serves stateside in church ministry and overseas missions. She's bringing her life experience, problem solving skills to her own practice and to our discussion today, because those of you who listen to the podcast tend to say the lived experience really makes you feel seen and known. So we're going to talk a little bit about the day today about your neurodiverse marriage and family, and not knowing about that, being on the mission field, and kind of talk through some of that, because maybe there are some listeners. We know we have listeners in over 40 countries, and I'm being told they're usually ministers, ministry, or military. So I think that's going to resonate for some people. So where would you like to start our story today, Jenilee?
Just saying that lived experience that we all share. It's just really great to have this community here in this podcast to be able to talk about this topic, because it's hard. It's lonely out there, not knowing what you're dealing with and all the challenges that come with it. And I'm just glad we're here talking about it today.
So I'm going to start with one of my kind of pet peeves, and kind of lead us into this. The denomination I belong to and you belong to was based on missions, which is amazing. I'm very proud of the history of
Yes.
that, to take the
Mhm.
gospel into all the world, and that is a fundamental feature. But through the years, something that has grown kind of annoying to me is making missionaries into like martyrs and heroes. Now, if someone loses their life for their faith because they're ministering, I get that. That's true martyrdom. But what I've noticed is when like bad or tragic things happen to missionaries and the family on the field, a marriage issue, a mental health breakdown, a child needs surgery, someone fell off a roof thatching a house. It's like, well, that's just the work of the Lord. That's just the sacrifice they made for the mission. And so my heart about a decade ago was like, who are helping these missionaries with their marriage and family? What happens? Like, I know how difficult it is if I have a child with an issue and I'm fighting all this stuff here in the United States. What about a missionary who has a special needs child? What about a missionary who, like, they're maybe questioning, should they even be in the mission anymore? Who's coming alongside marriages and families? It kind of feels like let's kind of drop you off in this space. You've got God and the word and your mission, and, in my faith circles was kind of like better to burn out for God than rust out for God. So there was like, again, this hero mentality for burning out, and this martyr mentality of, oh, yeah, well, the mission field is hard. So sometimes it's going to take out marriages. And that over the past few years, has really, really, really bothered me. So
Yeah.
kind of being on the mission field, first of all, just kind of for people who maybe your church, they don't have a lot of missionaries come and speak. I mean, I have missionaries come and speak all the time at my church, but like just a little bit of the life of the missionary, first of all, because we had to go into executive function and all that kind of stuff. But what's the little bit of the life of being missions overseas?
Yeah, it is very busy. It requires a lot of travel, a lot of planning, a lot of communication, fundraising, speaking, reports. It is paperwork for visas and countries and immunizations and keeping track of so much information. And that's not even to the actual ministry part yet, when you're learning language and you're working with partners on the field and churches and pastors there who need you, and they need your attention and they need your help. And then if you have something else going on, health or neurodivergence or special needs of any kind, and you're trying to get help for that and understanding for that through your supporters and through the mission and through your team, it's extremely complicated.
So let's just kind of start back. Maybe for some of you, if you, again, if world missions is not part of your faith circles, usually something starts in the beginning with like itineration, right? There's the whole
Yep.
process that can look kind of similar to being like an ordained minister, but it's like a couple more steps. So let's just assume we've done all the Bible study and all the things to get to the calling. Usually the first thing, like, is the first round of itineration. Now, I know the answer, but I'm going to ask the question. So when you're ready to raise your funds, and let's say you've got to raise $50,000 or $80,000 before you can even go to the field, does the organization just hand you a piece of paper of about 20 churches that are going to be guaranteed supporters for you, and then you kind of jump on your little speaking circuit and you just kind of run that circuit with all of your speaking gigs?
There are a few organizations that do help a little bit with that, but ours did not, and most of them don't. You have to cold call, you have to talk to your network, you have to try to get into churches. It's a lot of calling and email and Facebook messages and just relying on the people that you know, going to events and networking. A lot of marketing online. You have to have a presence online and writing and social media. People have to be able to get to know you to raise that support or even have you at their church or trust you with their pulpit. So it's a big job just to build that network and then to build your support and then to be able to go.
All right. So let's kind of go back to something that many of us might take it for granted, and that's having a church community. So let's say a lot of churches are called First Assembly. So I'm just going to pick, First Assembly, Michigan. That's where you live now. All right. So First Assembly, Michigan is a church like maybe where you and your family are, and you get prayed out and sent out. They're going to be like your home church.
Mm-hmm.
In many cases, that's not your main and only supporter. So now we've been prayed out. And about how many weeks of the year are you going to be out on the road, networking, cold calling, a Wednesday night service, a Sunday night service, Sunday night, Sunday? Maybe you're going to get monthly support. Maybe they're going to give you a one-time offering that's going to go into your, big funds that you're. So how many weeks of the year, once you're kind of called and prayed out, are you going to be doing a lot of that traveling to churches? Whoever will take you is where you go, I guess.
Every week. It's a 12 to 18 month process usually, sometimes more, and it's traveling every week. You're trying to book every service somewhere, every day, some kind of coffee or meetup or dinner or meal. As you're traveling, you're stopping in certain cities where certain supporters are or family members. It's a full-time job every week for months.
All right. So when you're traveling, who's paying for the gas, the hotels that you're staying in? How's all that being covered while you're trying to raise money and you're going out and talking to people, handshaking, networking? How's that work?
For us, I think it works different for every organization. I think for us, it was coming out of the funds that we were raising. So you're almost spending them as fast as they're coming in. But that does start to even out and you get a surplus coming in. If you're wanting to get to the field faster, then a lot of times you put in personal funds. There's a lot of personal funds that goes into that, and staying with family and staying in random people's houses and some church members' basement. And we've had cats jumping on us in the middle of the night and all kinds of crazy places. Gotten up in the middle of the night and left where they had us staying because it was not safe or not clean. It's a journey of figuring out, is it worth paying for an Airbnb so we can have our own space, or do
Or
we
church
take
member
this?
X's basement with a crazy cat?
Yeah, with the crazy cats that are jumping on my neurodivergent kids in the middle of the night.
Right. So as I'm continuing to ask these questions, listeners, I want you to understand a little bit of a spoiler alert. 4 out of 5 family members are neurodivergent. Right. We haven't
Mhm.
gotten there yet because nobody's diagnosed. So at this point
Yep,
in
we
the
did not
calling,
know.
nobody knows anything.
Nope, we didn't know.
Right. So just think about all the things so far. So we're leaving church community, we're building finances, weird hotels, smelly board members, houses, basements, cats. different churches, different locations, different rooms, like week to week to week. So we don't have like our base. So the kids don't have base church, anymore, their children's program or their youth program. Mom and dad, you're out, you got to do the thing. And when you're at church, you're working. You're working. You got to shake the hand, do the thing, make the connection. Church day is work day. It's not rest or Sabbath. And it's different every time. And sometimes there's big rewards and sometimes like, oh, there's nothing that happened. But all of this unknown under the surface is 4 out of 5 members are neurodivergent and we're not on the field yet.
Yep. And homeschooling on the road.
Homeschooling on the road. All right. So let's add homeschooling on the road while
Random
we're doing
church
this.
Nurseries, libraries, you name it.
That would be my daughter. That would have been a disaster for my daughter. It was hard enough getting her in the same church nursery with different nursery workers each week, much less a different nursery, a different room, a different worker, a different dialect, because she was pretty fussy about certain dialects she just could not handle. All right. So 12 to 18 months, some can get there quicker. Definitely this faith journey, and you're funding the journey while you're going.
While it's happening.
All right.
Yep.
So now we got to like pack up and leave. So now we go get us to the field, get us executive function and things are going to happen. We have the money, we have the go green light, we have all of our pamphlets, market media, we've made our trailer. All right. Now what? Now we got to get to somewhere outside the United States.
Means selling all of your stuff, all of your collections, all of your little pieces and parts to things have to get stored somewhere or sold, which is a whole process. Sorting toys and stuffed animals and favorite Barbies, and all of that was, looking back, so traumatic. And buying plane tickets. We had to go to Chicago to the French embassy because we were going to France for a year before we went to Africa, which is so stressful. 5 sets of paperwork, doctor's appointments, all the copies of everything that you need, all of your passports. There's a lot that has to happen. Once your budget's raised, there's a lot that has to happen. And a lot of that is executive function, paperwork, and planning, and navigating the timing of things, having the right amount of stuff, planning what you're going to need, planning in 50-pound suitcases of how you're going to move your family across the ocean in 50 pounds at a time. It's pretty complicated and a lot of mental load.
Yes. I mean, I was just thinking back, listeners, if you've followed our story for a while, when Dan and I had 3 trees fall and we moved 9 times in 21 months, and essentially getting it down to, we had like 12 baskets, and Dan had figured out, because he loves Tetris, what goes in what box and how that's going to fit in the truck. And they only fit one way in the truck. And so he had to be careful from place to place not to pick up new stuff or add to it because we only had space, for a couple of suitcases and all of these plastic bins. And so just all the things of packing it up, making sure it was in the right buckets, weight and size, and it would all going to fit, because the lid had to close on the truck in case it rained, right? When you're living out of the truck. And then you got to kind of let go of some of your personal belongings and things that are important to you. And then the constant planning of where am I going to go and where we're going to stay. For us, it was State Farm. For you, it's a ministry organization of what's the thing, what's the next step, what's the paperwork, what's the next thing to fill out. So my tiny little experience, I mean, we knew about our neurodiversity. We knew about it. We were kind of already in the, strengths and challenges. Let's work to our strengths so that, we're constantly working in tandem to each other. But y'all don't know this about your story yet. So you've got 5 things of paperwork. You're homeschooling in transition, I'm assuming, to France. You got to go through the embassy, visas, all that kind of stuff. All right, you're in France, and that we're not staying in France for a long time. So we can't really build a huge community here in France because we're going to South America. All right, so it's another kind of temporary 12 to 18 months itineration, transfer over to France. We're going to be here a year, and then we're going to transition and move again. What's that like for the kids? How are they kind of handling that? Again, we don't know they're neurodivergent yet, but how are they responding to all of this change and transition?
Yeah, there was a lot of meltdowns and shutdowns, and what are we doing? High stress, just really intense moments, but we were still at the beginning of our journey. So we were thinking, surely this hard stuff will end at some point. If we can just get through this, then it'll get better. But when you're moving around and traveling and working overseas, the stress just keeps coming. And then you add in another language and another school system. France is very behind in when it comes to helping kids in schools, and actual abuse that was happening in the classroom for our girls because they were struggling to learn French, struggling to write in cursive in France. There was just a lot of complications that made that year really, really difficult. So then when we landed in Senegal, there was definite deficits to what their education gaps because they had gone to school in France. They were missing pieces that they just couldn't possibly grasp in the midst of everything that was going on. That's a whole other set of goodbyes. You just connect with these people at language school for a year, and then you have to disrupt everything, pack it all up, and say goodbye again and land in another new country. All of that chaos had an impact. I just didn't understand at the time, none of us did, really why it was so hard.
And you're the neurotypical in the family. So all of these things are difficult for you too. Or it's not just
Hmm.
quote difficult for neurodivergent people. All of these changes and transition and
So
mental
hard.
load was
Hmm.
difficult for you. All right. So we're gonna kind of get to the part soon here where then like, all right, what does that mean for someone whose executive function works differently? Okay, so now we're transitioning to the mission, the place we're going to be. Probably first there was the honeymoon, like, okay, this is hard, but everything is hard. Everybody warned us it was going to be hard, and we just got to get all this stuff done so we can get to the mission, the place that we're supposed to be working, the place we know God's called us. Okay, so you're down in South Africa now, another transition, probably more paperwork, I'm assuming, because we're going from one country to another country, visa, passport, all that good stuff. All right. So now we're there, like on mission, getting a little bit of consistency and whatnot there. So kind of walk me through that process now that we're there. We got to have a new place. We got to have a place to live. How does all of that work?
It's complicated. We landed and we were staying in another missionary's house for just a few months while we were finding our own house. So even once we landed, we weren't landing, we still had another move. So we were living out of suitcases. Um, at that point, a lot of fears were coming out. We're in this new place, this new country. So the girls were having lots of meltdowns about just where are we and why is it so hot? Why does it feel like this? And the clothes feels really itchy because of all the sand and we don't have a dryer. So we're having to hang everything up. So everything feels different. There was just lots of new things that we were drowning in. I had some health issues going on when we first landed. So I was kind of out for the count for a little while. Um, it was a perfect storm of lots of really hard things that again, we just didn't know why it was so hard. Other families seemed to be able to navigate some of these changes, and it just felt like this is so hard. Why is this so hard? And the girls were going to a British school, and so their their poor little brains, they were in like that first, second, third, fourth grade where you're learning all your multiplication and division. They'd learned some of that in France. They'd learned some of it in America. Now they were at a British school and and then your spellings, your British have like that they add
Double
you
L's.
yeah, all the different spellings and they're poor little brains. They just couldn't possibly keep up. So that made school really frustrating and hard for them. Those first few years in Senegal were really challenging because of so many of the just this sensory factors that were coming at us: the sound, the noise, the length of a church service with pounding drums and flies flying all around, and thinking again, families do this. Families do this. Why is this so hard?
as a mom, what are you telling yourself? Like, mom, the clothes are too hard. They feel stiff because they're drying out, or they're too sandy, they're too itchy. It's too moist, it's too buzzy, it's too loud. Like, what are you originally thinking is going on with the girls? Like, are they just the most complaining children on the planet? Or what are you thinking? Like, why all of a sudden is all of this a bigger problem? What's the story you're telling yourself about that?
When the girls were small, especially my middle, Annalise, I had always thought autism might be there. She was so smart. She could take a puzzle and put it together, just turn the pieces. At like 18 months old, she was doing these crazy things that were beyond her age, but yet she potty trained late and other transitions were really difficult for her. So, and Abby, I knew my youngest, I knew she really struggled with sight words. She couldn't remember from one day to the next. We would study the THE and she'd say it. And then the next day it was like, I've never seen that before. I don't even know what that is. So there was things I'd noticed in homeschooling, and I'd talked to a pediatrician, I'd talked to an educational psychologist, and they were like, no, your girls are just in transition. They're going to adjust. They're going to be fine. They look me in the eye. They communicate really well. They're really expressive. So those thoughts were kind of in my mind that something's different, just from homeschooling and being in their space and seeing, okay, it's really loud outside. So for some reason, we can't do math today. Like, just like, why does it matter if there's goats outside? We still have to do math. Those kinds of things that I knew something was different, but I was having professionals tell me that that wasn't the case. And then we knew my husband probably had ADHD, so that was kind of always a factor in things. Um, but I didn't have the vocabulary, I didn't have the experience, the education to really understand what I was seeing. I just knew something was there. And it was after we left Senegal for our at the end of our first term, we came back to the States and the girls had some educational testing done where we found out about slow processing and high IQ, things like that, where they were considered special needs. They were able to get an IEP. When we headed back to Senegal at the international, they ended up going back to school at an American international school. So they had the IEPs, but still another educational psychologist was like, I just don't see autism. I don't think it's a picture. And I would tell her things. She's like, no, we don't need to do the testing. And so I kind of just kept thinking, maybe I'm just seeing things, maybe it's fine. But as they got older and our progression of we were in Senegal for another term, the girls went to boarding school and there was some trauma and that I didn't realize until later when the girls were telling me how difficult some of that was. There was some terrorist activity in West Africa at the time. So there was really valid things that they were afraid of, but their responses to it were,
Atypical.
yeah, it's just different. And so again, when we came back after our next term, um, talking to another educational psychologist, getting some more pieces of the puzzle, we transitioned to South Africa and were able to get an educational psychologist there who finally would sit down with us and go through the full process and help us figure out what we were looking at. And that's when the girls were diagnosed with autism and my husband as well.
Right. So again, if you're not familiar sometimes with how specifically the missions organization works, you're there on mission for what, maybe sometimes 3 to 5 years, but you got to come back to
Yep.
the States and itinerate again.
Yeah.
And is that like a usually a 2 to 3 year process when you come itinerate?
You hope to do it in a year. You're
Okay.
really, because at that point, you're established in life in two places. You've got your stateside things going, but then now you have a house and belongings and school and resources and your occupational therapist, your pediatrician, everybody's now in your new country. So you're trying to get back as fast as you can, but you still have to connect with all the supporters and raise the budget and do the America thing, which is really difficult because now you feel fully established in two places.
Right. So you're coming back to stateside, and while you may get to see your family, it's not really a family reunion for a year. You're still working. You're back to the
Yes.
networks, and you're not getting to just
Hmm.
be at your home church for a year. You're again trying to raise the money to get back on the field, right? So again, thinking for the kids and neurodivergence, they're here. Maybe you're here long enough to start getting new routines and attachments again to pick up and go back to the established place and then get back in those routines. And that's kind of the pattern,
Yep.
right? 3, 4, 5 years back, 12 to 18 months, or until you raise your funds and then back stateside. So you're kind of living like double lives in two places,
Yep.
which is difficult. And so, yes, people who are called to missions, that is a whole different level of ministry. And I really appreciate everyone who makes that sacrifice. But we're just trying to draw the picture that it's difficult for most families. But when you have undiagnosed, unknown neurodivergence in there, um, and so I kind of go into another little pet peeve that a lot of churches don't know what neurodiversity is.
Right.
Who've heard my story know that, people thought it was demon possession, or there's all these crazy ideas of where autism or ADHD comes from, especially in the church, especially our charismatic circles. It will tend to lead toward as a parenting problem or it's a spiritual demonic problem, right? So even now that we know, it can be difficult to know who to talk about this to and like who to
Right.
trust, and then where do you get the help? So kind of, I want to talk about the kind of 12 things. If listeners, I'd really want you to go back and listen to Robin Tate on executive function. I'm going to go really through the different things of executive function, and then we're going to talk about marriage and family and where these things get taxed. So readers, get ready. I'm getting ready to read really fast. Response inhibition. So that's self control. Working memory. That's your short term memory. And then not only just storing it, but being able to take it out of short term memory and being able to do something with it. Self regulation or emotional regulation. So that's self restraint. Task initiation. Being able to start a desired task when you want to and when you need to. That's very important in executive functioning. Sustained attention, being able to focus on a task when it's 100% complete, and clean it up and finish. That's the finishing of the task, is not 80%, but all the way finished, and you need to clean it up. Planning and prioritizing, the ability to lay out the what, where, and why of the task, to plan and prioritize, to be able to shift, to have a deadline and know what the sequence is. Organization, create and manage systems, keep track of your things, concrete, electronic, your responsibilities and ideas. So some of those are real things like your physical stuff, but then your own deadlines and where you should be and your responsibilities and tracking where you're at and your ideas. Time management, managing time in the present and the future, and being able to predict. This is a hard one with ADHD and autism. Predicting how long a task will take, having the tools you need to act within that task, and then actually doing it within the time strains while maintaining work life and family balance. That's a tough one. Flexibility, that's cognitively and behaviorally, being able to shift, to change, to deal with unexpected things that come up, right? You had a perfect plan. We were going to go do that thing, but a monsoon came or something. What are we going to do? The weather is totally shifted and we need to do something different. Metacognition is self-awareness. That's how I think about what I'm thinking, being able to monitor myself, my behavior, and my mood, and how it's impacting other people. Persistence, self-motivation, and perseverance, being able to push through when something's boring and I don't want to. And then there's stress tolerance and resilience, tolerating the discomfort, the unexpected demands, and still pushing through the situation. Now, it seems like everything we've talked about, those 12 items, could be difficult on the mission field with neurodivergence. Anyone not apply as I was reading the list?
I could give you stories for all of those things. Uh, It feels like this is the illustration I like to use because I think on both sides it feels this way. For me, the neurotypical in the family, to try to get our whole family where we have to be, wanting to do or knowing what we have to do, all of the things you just described. It's like pulling your family through wet cement or dragging them through the mud. It's so hard. And then to have compassion on the other side, how hard it is for them to work up the energy to do something or to know what they're supposed to be doing, how hard they're working to do those things, and how much for living overseas and ministry and work, navigating all of that really takes everybody being able to do those things. It's so difficult. And I, looking back, thinking all the things, all these examples I could give you of trying to manage our time and manage all the sensory things and all the needs of everybody in the family at the same time, plus my own challenges with I just don't feel like sending that newsletter today, but nobody else is going to do that. I have to do that. Um, it's what makes it so difficult and so tiring. And then you mentioned being able to explain that to people and in a way that doesn't sound like an excuse or we're just going to slap some label on this, but really let's educate ourselves. What is neurodiversity? What is autism? What is ADHD? How is it impacting our people on the field? How do we equip and accommodate and help the whole family to make sure that one person isn't burning out, that people with brain differences have a way to do what God's called them to do?